Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we join Hercule Poirot in Hercule Poirot and the Enigma of the Rusted Telescope. It was no ordinary object, abandoned on a windswept cliffside. The telescope pointed not at the stars, but at something far more earthly and far more deadly. Stay with me till the end, because what Poirot sees through the fog isn't just a clue, it's a vision of a crime long obscured. So, pour yourself a cup of tea and settle in, because today's mystery will have you questioning what's hidden in plain sight and what lies just beyond the lens. Chapter 1. The Hook. The inciting incident was a night like any other at the lavish Blackwood estate, a sprawling manor nestled amidst the misty hills of Devonshire. The evening air, thick with the scent of damp earth and aged wood, swirled around the high windows and drew the faintest chill into the grand hall. Inside, the glittering chandeliers bathed the guests in an ethereal glow, reflecting off the polished marble floors and the sumptuous velvet curtains. There was a quiet hum of conversation, punctuated by the soft clink of crystal glasses as champagne was served. The Blackwood estate, owned by the wealthy but reclusive Sir Reginald Blackwood, had hosted some of the finest gatherings in England for the past decade. Tonight, the estate was alive with the laughter and chatter of well-to-do guests, artists, aristocrats, and socialites who had made their way to the estate to celebrate the renowned astronomer, Professor Algernon Fiske, who had recently unearthed a discovery that was to change the very fabric of modern science. At the center of the evening's festivities stood Professor Fiske, his gray hair neatly combed back, his sharp blue eyes glimmering with enthusiasm, as he regaled a captivated circle of guests with tales of his studies into the stars. Sir Reginald, a towering figure in his early 60s, stood quietly to the side, watching the professor with a bemused smile on his face. Though Sir Reginald had long held the reputation of a man who valued privacy above all else, tonight he seemed content enough to host a gathering of like-minded individuals. The reason for his rare public appearance was simple. He adored Professor Fiske, a man who, much like himself, had an obsession with the mysteries of the universe. It was Sir Reginald who had gifted the professor the piece de resistance of the evening, the Blackwood telescope, a massive, state-of-the-art instrument crafted by the finest lensmakers in Europe. At the stroke of midnight, a loud, startling crack cut through the jovial atmosphere. The chandelier above them trembled, as though it were in the throes of an earthquake. Guests turned in confusion, and for a moment, it seemed as though the very mansion itself were shifting. Then, amidst the murmur of panic, the cause of the noise became apparent. A heavy, metallic object fell from the upper balcony with a sickening thud. The guests, now frozen in place, stared in disbelief as the rusted telescope, once a symbol of the estate's astronomical pride, lay in a crumpled heap on the floor, its brass components shattered and scattered across the floor like an ill-fated dream. But it was not the telescope that caused the gasps of horror. It was the body of Professor Fiske, lying unnaturally twisted next to the wreckage. His face was obscured by the shattered lens of the telescope, but the unmistakable crimson stain of blood spread from beneath him, pooling across the marble floor. The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one dared to move. The guests looked from one another, uncertain of what had just happened, until finally, a voice broke the stillness. "Call for the police," someone shouted, but before the command could be fully issued, the front doors to the manor swung open with a heavy creak, and there, standing in the doorway, was none other than Hercule Poirot, his trademark mustache neatly curled and his eyes sharp with curiosity. He had arrived just in time to witness the chaos unravel. The Belgian detective, who had been enjoying a quiet stay in the nearby village, had received a mysterious note earlier in the evening, urging him to attend the gathering. The sender was unknown, but something in the tone of the letter had piqued Poirot's interest. Now, as he stood amidst the wreckage of the telescope, the lifeless body of the renowned professor, and the bewildered faces of the guests, Poirot's mind already began to turn. Sir Reginald, visibly shaken, stepped forward, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Detective Poirot, we are in the midst of a terrible tragedy. Please, you must help us." Poirot's gaze swept across the room, his eyes flicking from one guest to another, assessing the fear, the guilt, and the confusion that gripped them all. He did not speak immediately, instead taking a long, slow breath. As though contemplating the enigma before him, "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "There has been a crime, oui, but there is more to this than what the eyes perceive. You are correct to call me. I will solve this puzzle. But first, allow me to observe, for it is through the smallest detail that the truth reveals itself." The guests, still too stunned to question Poirot's presence, nodded nervously. No one would dare deny the detective, for his reputation preceded him. As Poirot bent down to examine the fallen professor and the wreckage around him, he noticed something curious. A faint pattern of dust disturbed on the balcony railing, as though something or someone had recently touched it. There, hidden in plain sight, was the beginning of the puzzle. Something had gone terribly wrong that night, and Poirot's little gray cells would soon begin to uncover the truth. The stage was set. The murder of Professor Fisk was just the beginning, and Hercule Poirot, as ever, would leave no stone unturned. Chapter 2. The first closed drawing room had been hastily cleared. Sir Reginald, still pale and stunned, had withdrawn to a nearby armchair while the guests murmured anxiously behind him. Gathered in tense clusters, the constables from the local station had arrived, dutiful but overwhelmed. It was clear they lacked the expertise for such a refined and peculiar affair. Poirot stood calmly near the broken telescope, arms behind his back, eyes narrowed with deliberate calculation. His gaze flicked over the instrument's shattered remains, then to the body of Professor Fisk, now respectfully covered with a linen sheet. Constable Wilkes, a ruddy-cheeked man in his late 40s, stepped toward Poirot hesitantly. "Begging your pardon, sir, but this looks like an accident, wouldn't you say?" The telescope collapsed. It must have given out under its own weight. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, monsieur, we are always eager to label chaos as mere misfortune. But accidents, they do not often choose such curious timing or such curious victims." He knelt beside the wreckage, brushing his gloved fingers gently over a jagged metal edge. There were rust flakes here, yes, but also clean metal exposed beneath, as if something had recently been tampered with. He looked up toward the balcony from which the instrument had fallen. It was a steep height, certainly fatal. "Tell me," Poirot asked Sir Reginald, who had now regained some composure, "when was this telescope last used?" Sir Reginald blinked. "Used just yesterday. I was showing it to Fisk. He'd mentioned an unusual cluster visible this week. We examined it together. It was in perfect condition. No sign of weakness. Then how, monsieur? Has it become a skeleton of rust in less than 24 hours? Poirot tapped the base of the telescope. "You see, parts of this have been deliberately corroded. Acid, perhaps, or something more subtle." Wilkes squinted. "You're suggesting sabotage?" Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped over to the balcony. The railing bore a distinct smear, fine oil and dust, recently disturbed. He touched the mark delicately, then turned to Wilkes. "No footprints, no trace of movement." The constable shook his head. "The floor's polished stone. Nothing stays. No one saw anything." Poirot glanced at the guests below. "On the contrary, someone saw something. Whether they admit it is another matter." Sir Reginald stood slowly. "If this was deliberate, who would do such a thing?" Fisk was well-liked, admired. Poirot's mustache twitched. "Admired, perhaps, but admiration, it can sour into envy, especially in matters of discovery. Did he speak of anything new, something significant? Sir Reginald hesitated. He mentioned, yes, something he'd glimpsed through the telescope, a peculiar object near Saturn. He said it could change how we understand the outer system, but he was secretive about it. Ah, Poirot nodded. Secrets always cast long shadows. He then moved to the desk near the far end of the drawing room. A leather-bound notebook rested open, the ink still drying on the last page. Poirot read it carefully. There were calculations, orbital diagrams, and hastily scrawled annotations. One phrase repeated, mirror anomaly repeating arc. Beneath it, the ink trailed off as though the writer had been interrupted mid-thought. Did the professor keep his notes private? Poirot asked. Yes, Sir Reginald replied. In fact, he carried them everywhere. That notebook never left his person. Poirot frowned. And yet now, it rests here, exposed. Curious, he turned toward the remaining guests. A few avoided his gaze. One, a sharp-eyed woman in a crimson dress, met his eyes directly. Poirot made a mental note of her. People who look too directly at a question often have an answer rehearsed. From the corner of the room, a thin man with a mop of disheveled hair spoke nervously. Surely you don't believe one of us is responsible. That telescope could have simply broken. Poirot gave a small smile. Monsieur, everything is possible, but not everything is probable. And here, in this room, there are too many eyes that blink at the wrong moment. He returned to the ruined telescope. Among the twisted brass, something glinted. Poirot bent closer and extracted a small fragment glass, blackened at the edge. With a fine hairline crack, he held it up. This lens, see how it was heated, as if someone applied flame directly to it. But why damage the lens if one's goal is to kill the observer? Sir Reginald murmured, unless the observation itself was dangerous. Poirot inclined his head slightly. Yes, or perhaps too revealing. The guests now stood silent, the weight of implication settling over them. Poirot turned away from the telescope and addressed the room. Tonight, a man died beneath the stars he loved. But make no mistake, he did not fall by chance. He was pushed, not by hands perhaps, but by intention. And so, I shall look into your truths, messieurs et mesdames, and your omissions. For always it is in the smallest inconsistency that the crime reveals itself. And with that, Hercule Poirot, without raising his voice, made it unmistakably clear the true investigation had begun. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects. Be early morning. The drawing room had been cleared of the wreckage, and Professor Fisk's body was transported discreetly to a nearby facility in the village. But Poirot, with the full cooperation of Sir Reginald, had commandeered the estate's library, a grand, wood-paneled chamber that overlooked the fog-draped gardens, as his base of operations. Here, he requested that all guests remain within the estate until further notice. None protested, some from guilt, some from fear, and a few Poirot noticed with calculated calm. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, as Poirot requested each of the house's remaining guests to assemble. He preferred to observe his suspects together first, before speaking to them individually. He always said, "The truth reveals itself in contrast. Let them speak among themselves, and the lies, they will begin to quarrel." They entered in groups of twos and threes. Poirot watched them closely as they took their seats. First came Lady Portia Vale, the woman in crimson, gliding in with practiced elegance, a celebrated art critic with a razor-sharp wit. She was known for her caustic reviews and sharp eye for flaws. Her face was unreadable, lips painted the color of crushed cherries, her gloved hands resting delicately on her lap. Beside her, her protege and traveling companion, Mr. Oliver Dean, a quiet man in his 30s with a twitch of nervous energy in his posture. An amateur astronomer and sketch artist, he'd often been seen at Fisk's side during past events. His eyes darted from corner to corner, never settling long. Then came Dr. Horace Whitby, a rotund gentleman with a pince-nez perched precariously on his nose, a retired physician turned writer of medical thrillers. He had a booming voice and a tendency to interrupt. His admiration for Professor Fisk was known, though Poirot sensed something more brittle behind his bravado. Next, Ivy Blackwood, Sir Reginald's much younger second wife, entered alone. Slender, composed, and eerily silent, she moved with a feline grace. Her cool demeanor gave little away, but Poirot detected a faint flicker of something behind her eyes, resentment, perhaps, or fear disguised as poise. Close behind, Thomas Linwood, Sir Reginald's secretary, stepped in. Thin as a reed and severely dressed, he clutched a leather notebook, which he seemed reluctant to part with. Poirot noticed a faint ink smudge on his cuff, a detail others might dismiss, but to him it whispered of hurried writing after the tragedy. Finally, Miss Thelma Quayle, Fisk's housekeeper and assistant for nearly 15 years, arrived, wringing her hands. Gray-haired, middle-aged, and plainly dressed, she looked utterly undone. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she whispered a shaky greeting to Poirot before taking her seat at the far end. Apart from the others, Poirot stood before them, his hands gently steepled. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you for your cooperation. Last night, a man of science, a man of curiosity and intellect, died under mysterious circumstances. I do not believe this was an accident. I believe someone in this house knows more than they admit." There were audible gasps. Ivy Blackwood raised a brow. Oliver Dean's foot tapped involuntarily. Poirot continued, "It is not merely the broken telescope or the wound on the professor's head that leads me to this conclusion. It is the detail, the odd displacement of his notebook, the scorched lens, the faint scent of metal polish on the stairs when none had been used that day. These things, they speak." Lady Portia leaned back. "Are we to be suspects now, monsieur?" "All of us. But of course," Poirot said pleasantly, "that is how the truth is found. Each of you had access, each of you shared space with the professor, and each of you had reason, perhaps hidden, perhaps small, to fear or resent what he might uncover." Dr. Whitby huffed. "You can't possibly believe any of us would stoop to murder." Fisk was respected. "Respected," Poirot repeated softly. "Yes, but perhaps feared too. Did he not speak of a discovery one he claimed would reshape the science of the heavens?" A silence followed. Poirot caught the fleeting glances, from Dean to Portia, from Linwood to Ivy, threads between them, fine and barely visible, yet unmistakable. He raised a finger. "Today I will speak to each of you, alone, but before that observe one another, for even silence betrays." He stepped aside and nodded to Wilkes to begin escorting them individually back to the study. As the guests rose, Poirot whispered to himself, "One of them fears what I might find in the stars." Chapter 4. Poirot arrives despite the hushed decorum of the Blackwood estate. The corridors now hummed with unease. Poirot walked with quiet precision down the long carpeted hallway, the heels of his patent leather shoes tapping a rhythm of steady thought. The first interviews would begin shortly, but before confronting words, he preferred to confront space. He requested access to Professor Fisk's private guest quarters, and Sir Reginald, still rattled but obliging, led him there personally. "It's just down this way," the old man said, his voice strained. "I gave him the East Wing suite. He liked the view of the Star Garden." Poirot nodded silently, observing everything: the faint scuff marks along the mahogany skirting board, the tarnished handle of the guest room door, the lingering scent of lavender oil mixed faintly with something, yes, ammonia. Sir Reginald opened the door. "Here we are." The room was tidy, methodical, like the man who had lived in it. A leather valise sat untouched in the corner, its buckles fastened. A folded nightshirt lay on the chair, but the desk caught Poirot's immediate attention. On it sat a small brass telescope, not the grand one that had fallen, but a personal model. one Fisk was known to travel with. It was perfectly aligned to face the open window, pointing skyward through a narrow gap in the curtains. Poirot stepped closer. Did he use this often, do you know? He did, said Sir Reginald. Said it helped him prepare observations before using the main scope. Habit, really. Poirot touched the edge of the desk. The telescope was cool, unmarked, but the ink bottle beside it was uncorked, and the pen nib beside it stained dark red. He examined the blotter. The last words scribbled faintly there. It returned. Not possible. And yet, Sir Reginald peered over his shoulder. He was a man of great imagination, or a man of great discovery, Poirot murmured. He turned to the bed. On the nightstand was a single slip of paper, folded. Poirot opened it carefully. Beware the eye that does not blink. No signature. No date. Poirot folded it once more and tucked it into his pocket. Did he receive any visitors in this room? Poirot asked. None that I know of, Sir Reginald said, frowning. Although Ivy did sometimes bring him his evening tea. He refused the staff. He claimed they always left streaks on the glassware. Poirot turned slowly toward him. And the key to this room? He kept it to himself, though. The staff do have a skeleton key for emergencies. Trisbeen, Poirot said. Thank you, monsieur. Sir Reginald hesitated. You think this was murder, don't you? Poirot regarded him gently. I think a man who fears discovery more than death is capable of strange actions, and others who fear what that man might reveal are capable of worse. Back in the study, Poirot prepared for his first round of interviews, but before beginning, he summoned Constable Wilkes and quietly inquired, Tell me, mon ami, was anything taken from the professor's body? Wilkes scratched his head. Not that I know of. Except, yes, the breast pocket of his waistcoat was empty, but we found an impression inside the lining. It looked like a small square, maybe a box or case of some sort. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A lens case, perhaps, or a compact, something that was meant to be found missing. He paced slowly across the floor, then turned and asked Wilkes, Did any of the guests express particular concern at the scene? Anyone too quiet or too dramatic? Wilkes considered. Well, the secretary, Linwood, barely said a word, stood stiff as a board, and the young artist Dean kept asking whether the telescope could have been moved the day before. Odd thing to fixate on, no? Poirot smiled faintly. None, not odd at all. It means he believes it was moved, and that is information he could not have unless he saw it happen. As the first suspect approached the door, the sound of footsteps, soft and hesitant. Poirot composed himself. His questions would be gentle at first, seemingly innocent. He never hunted his prey with force. He let them expose themselves in the silence between words. Enter. He called. Lady Portia Vale stepped in, cool as a porcelain figure. Poirot gestured to the chair across from him. Please, madam, let us talk of telescopes, and of truths that shift, like stars, just when you think you've fixed their position. Outside, the fog deepened. The estate was still, but within, the game of minds had begun. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Lady Portia Vale sat with her back impeccably straight, legs crossed neatly, gloved hands folded in her lap. She wore the look of a woman accustomed to questioning others, not to being questioned. Poirot noted the deliberate poise, the calculated stillness. Only her eyes betrayed a flicker of something more, curiosity perhaps, or caution, I imagine. She began, This is where I claim innocence, and you nod knowingly, Monsieur Poirot. He smiled politely. No, madam, this is where I listen, and where your truth reveals itself, not in denial, but in detail. She raised a brow. Very well. Ask your questions. Your connection to Professor Fisk? She let the silence linger before replying. He was a mind I respected. We moved in overlapping circles, intellectual salons, scientific exhibitions, the like. We did not always agree, but I admired his clarity. Poirot leaned slightly forward. You were seen speaking with him privately just before the announcement. May I ask what was said? A debate, she said coolly. He had made bold claims. Some of them are ridiculous. I reminded him that even brilliance must be grounded. Poirot folded his hands. You mean his observation, this mirror anomaly? She blinked. So he mentioned it to you as well. I thought he was keeping it under wraps. Interesting, Poirot murmured. And did this disagreement upset him? Please, she chuckled without humor. Algernon lived for debate. But he was guarded that evening. Almost giddy, but strangely anxious. Anxious? Poirot repeated. She tilted her head. Yes, like a man who had won something but feared the cost. Poirot watched her carefully. Did you know he kept all his notes with him at all times? I did, she replied. He was obsessive. But genius often comes with obsession. And yet his notebook was left unattended in the drawing room, Poirot said, as though someone had been reading it. She didn't flinch. Perhaps someone had. But it wasn't me. Poirot smiled faintly. You understand, madam. I must ask what you were doing at the time of the accident. She regarded him coolly. In the west corridor. I had stepped away to take a call on Sir Reginald's telephone. Oliver Dean can confirm he passed me on his way to the terrace. Poirot nodded. Merci, madam. That will be all for now. She rose with an elegant sweep of her coat and left without looking back. Poirot's eyes lingered on the door a moment before calling for the next guest. Oliver Dean entered quickly, shoulders hunched, fingers twitching at the hem of his sleeve. He sat without being asked, then immediately stood again. Sorry, nervous habit. No need to apologize, monsieur, Poirot said kindly. You knew Professor Fisk well, yes? Dean nodded. He was a mentor. I'm not formally trained, but he always made time for my questions. Treated me like a colleague. Poirot leaned in. Were you aware of any disputes between the professor and others at the estate? Dean hesitated. Not openly, but there was tension, especially between him and Dr. Whitby. Something about data theft, I think. Fisk once said someone had tried to publish findings suspiciously close to his. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And what about Lady Portia? She spoke of challenging his ideas. Dean's jaw tightened. She always challenged everyone. But, yes, their last conversation was heated. And you, monsieur? Poirot asked gently. Were you angry with the professor? Dean looked stricken. No, never. I idolized him. If anything, I was worried. He wasn't sleeping. He kept pacing, muttering to himself about reflections that didn't reflect. Poirot frowned. What do you make of that phrase? Dean shrugged. I thought he was just being poetic, or delirious. He believed something was wrong with the telescope, not just the structure, but what it showed. Poirot nodded slowly. And where were you when it happened? Just outside, on the terrace, looking up at the stars. Alone? Dean hesitated. Yes, although I passed Lady Portia near the corridor. She looked distressed. Thank you, monsieur, Poirot said. That will be all. Dean rose and paused. Do you think it was murder? Poirot tilted his head. I think, monsieur, that people often lie most convincingly when they are frightened of the truth. Asterisk asterisk. As Dean left, Poirot remained still for a long moment, piecing together threads in silence. There were contradictions already, shifts in tone, overlapping timelines, and, above all, one unsettling thought. Professor Fisk had seen something not meant to be seen, and someone had ensured he never spoke of it again. Chapter 6. First false lead, third to be summoned was Dr. Horace Whitby. He entered the study with a bristle of indignation, his pince-nez askew and his cane clicking with impatient taps against the floor. Well, he huffed, lowering himself into the chair across from Poirot. I suppose this is the part where you ask if I hated the man. Poirot folded his hands, ever serene. Do you, monsieur? Whitby's face flushed a shade darker. I respected him, which is more than I can say for most. though he was arrogant, secretive, and dismissive of those he considered beneath his great mind. Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, I am told there was a dispute between you. Something about published work that bore striking similarities?" Whitby waved the accusation away. "Coincidence. The scientific world is full of overlapping thoughts. Fisk accused everyone of theft at some point, paranoia wrapped in genius." Poirot's voice remained gentle. "Did you wish him harm?" Whitby snorted. "I wish he'd been kinder. But no, I did not kill him. You'll need more than past disagreements to build a case, monsieur." Poirot leaned slightly forward. "What were you doing during the incident?" "In the library, drafting a new article on lunar mineralogy," Whitby said. "Ask Linwood if you doubt it. He came to fetch a volume and saw me there." Poirot made a note. "Did you observe anything unusual the day before? Any visitors to the telescope room? Strange behavior from Fisk?" Whitby hesitated, tapping his cane once before answering. "He was evasive. He didn't attend dinner. Said he needed solitude. And when I brought him coffee, he barely noticed I was there, just kept muttering about reflections and shifting alignments. Quite mad, frankly." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You entered his room?" "Yes, just briefly. He was sketching something. Some formation he'd observed. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. He slammed the notebook shut when he saw me looking." Poirot considered this. "What did the sketch resemble?" "A circle, and something like a second shadow within it." I assumed he was tired. He stood abruptly. "Are we done? Or must I submit a fingerprint?" "You may go," Poirot said mildly. The door closed, and Poirot remained still. He was beginning to detect a pattern. Each suspect insisted on another's presence to verify their own. An interlinked web of half-truths, with no clear center. But it was Constable Wilkes who returned a few minutes later, face flushed, holding an object wrapped in cloth. "You asked me to have the grounds searched, sir. One of the gardeners found this behind the east hedge, near the service gate." He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a pair of gardening gloves, stiff and dark with grime. More crucially, the fingertips were stained with what looked suspiciously like rust or corrosion. And folded inside one glove was a brass bolt, identical to those used in the telescope's mounting. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And who has access to that hedge?" he asked. Wilkes replied, "All staff. But Miss Thelma Quayle, the professor's assistant, was seen out there the morning after." Poirot said nothing, but his silence was heavy. Miss Quayle was summoned next. She arrived trembling, her hands wringing a kerchief so tightly it might have unraveled. Her voice was small. I didn't hurt him, monsieur. I swear it." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "No one has accused you, mademoiselle. Please, tell me, what were you doing in the garden yesterday morning?" "I needed air," she whispered. "I couldn't bear to be inside. I walked the perimeter just to breathe." Poirot laid the bolt gently on the table. "And these gloves, mademoiselle, do they belong to you?" She flinched. "Yes, they're mine. But I didn't leave them there. I always keep them in the potting shed." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Do you recognize this bolt?" "No," she said quickly, then added, "but he told me. The telescope was acting strangely. He suspected someone had tampered with it. He asked me to keep watch quietly." "And did you see anything?" Miss Quayle swallowed hard. "I saw Mr. Linwood, the night before the accident, near the observatory stairs. He was holding something metallic." Poirot let her words settle. He now had two conflicting leads, the gloves stained with rust linked to Quayle. But her testimony directed suspicion at Linwood. A false lead had surfaced, but which was it? Only the minds behind the lies knew. And Poirot was growing ever closer to those minds. Chapter 7. The Psychological Gamma. Poirot sat alone in the study after Miss Quayle's departure, his fingertips pressed together beneath his chin. The web was tightening. Threads overlapped, but their center remained elusive. Two suspects had now placed the other in proximity to the telescope shortly before the accident, and yet neither confession rang entirely true. Both sounded more like shields than revelations. He asked Constable Wilkes to send in Thomas Linwood. The secretary entered with the stiffness of a man perpetually prepared for a reprimand. He carried his ever-present leather notebook, clutched tightly to his chest like a shield. "Please, Monsieur Linwood." Poirot gestured toward the chair. "Sit, relax, if you can." Linwood obeyed, but only halfway. His back remained rigid, his fingers drumming against the edge of the notebook. "I suppose you've heard Miss Quayle's accusation?" Poirot asked without preamble. Linwood looked startled, but quickly recovered. "I assumed as much. She's never liked me, and yet," Poirot said softly, "she claims to have seen you near the telescope staircase the night before the professor's death, holding something metallic." Linwood's jaw clenched. "I carry keys, a watch, my pen case. Any of those could appear metallic in the dark." Poirot's tone sharpened just slightly. "But you were there?" "I passed by. The professor had asked for an old journal of his. I thought he might be in the observatory. I knocked. He wasn't there." "You didn't think to mention this earlier?" Poirot asked. "I didn't think it mattered. I never went inside." Poirot leaned forward. "Monsieur Linwood, the telescope's bolts had been tampered with. The tools used were not found except for one bolt dropped and discovered in the hedge. The same hedge where your boots were seen trailing fresh mud. Tell me, how did your footprints get there?" Linwood swallowed hard. "I went to smoke. I didn't want anyone to see. Sir Reginald dislikes it. That's all." Poirot said nothing. He simply studied Linwood's face, the darting eyes, the clenched jaw, the twitch at the corner of his mouth. Then, very gently, he asked, "Did you steal something from Professor Fisk's room?" Linwood's entire posture stiffened. "What, no. A small item. A case, perhaps. Something that left a square imprint in the lining of his waistcoat pocket." Linwood faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." But he did. Poirot could see it. Not guilt, not quite, but recognition. The flash of knowledge in someone who thought no one else would ever find that detail. Poirot stood slowly. "That is all for now. But, monsieur, I caution you. Half-truths are more dangerous than lies. They give you just enough rope to trip on." Linwood left, pale and silent, the notebook pressed so tightly to his chest now that his knuckles had turned white. Poirot remained alone for a few moments longer. His mind turned over the conversation like a puzzle box, examining its corners. Linwood knew more, perhaps not about the murder itself, but certainly about something Fisk had kept hidden. And yet, Poirot's instincts told him that Linwood was not the killer. Nervous, secretive, yes, but not calculating enough. He had the look of a man protecting someone else, or perhaps something more valuable than reputation. He requested Ivy Blackwood next. She entered soundlessly. Dressed in deep emerald silk, her presence as cold and unreadable as the surface of a mirror. She seated herself with feline grace. "I understand you sometimes brought tea to Professor Fisk in the evenings," Poirot began. She nodded. "He disliked the staff. He trusted me. And you? Did you trust him?" She allowed herself the faintest smile. "Trust? That's a currency we don't spend freely in this house." "Ah," Poirot said. "And did you observe anything unusual the night he died?" Ivy's gaze drifted toward the tall window. "Unusual is relative. He was always strange, restless, muttering, writing cryptic things in that notebook of his. That night, I found him speaking aloud to himself. He didn't see me at first. What was he saying?" She hesitated, then whispered. "He said, 'It knows I've seen it. It's watching me back.'" Then he laughed, a dry, shaking laugh. I left quickly. Poirot absorbed her words carefully. "And where were you when the telescope fell?" "In the music room," she replied smoothly. "Alone. I often play at night. It calms the nerves." Poirot did not press her further. She was too composed. Her answers are to clean, but there was something beneath the polish, an absence of fear, of grief, a controlled detachment, dangerous in its own way. That as Ivy rose to leave, Poirot said softly, "Do you believe in coincidence?" "Madam," she paused at the door. "No, but I do believe in timing." Alone once more, Poirot stared at the chair she'd vacated. Someone in this house was lying with precision, and soon he would apply the pressure needed to crack the mask. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. The following morning brought no clarity, only fog. It clung to the windows of Blackwood Estate like a veil, muting the sunlight and dulling the garden paths. The household moved quietly, as though afraid to disturb something lurking just beneath the surface of their polished lives. Poirot, meanwhile, stood in the drawing room, his eyes fixed not on the crime scene, but on a single empty space on the bookshelf just large enough to fit a small box or document case. He turned to Constable Wilkes. "You are certain nothing else has been reported missing?" Wilkes nodded. "We checked all valuables, nothing was gone. No signs of forced entry either, and yet," Poirot murmured, "the professor's lens case is still missing. His pocket showed the impression, but it is nowhere in the house. Either someone took it to conceal what he saw or to keep it for themselves." Before Wilkes could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mrs. Ellison, the cook, her face pale beneath her apron. "Sir Poirot," she said nervously, "something's happened in the conservatory." Poirot followed her across the house, passing through long corridors of ancestral paintings and marble busts, until they reached the glass-domed conservatory at the western wing. There, among the orchids, lay a teacup shattered. The table beside it had been overturned. A trail of dark liquid ran across the stone floor, ending at a toppled chair. Beside it, crumpled and dazed, sat Lady Portia Vale, holding her stomach with trembling hands. Poirot rushed forward. "Madam, are you injured?" "I don't know," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I felt faint, then a sharp pain. The tea, it tasted strange." Poirot examined the cup. A faint, acrid scent lingered. "Not strong but unmistakable. Call the doctor," he told Wilkes. Immediately, turning back to Portia, he asked, "Who brought you the tea?" Her breath came in shallow bursts. "Miss Quayle. She said I looked tired and offered it to me. I didn't think why would she?" Poirot raised a hand. "You must rest, madam. Say no more for now." The doctor arrived within minutes. A weary man named Dr. Isherwood. He conducted a brief examination and announced that while Lady Portia had not ingested a lethal dose, there were clear signs of mild poisoning enough to cause disorientation and stomach distress. "She's lucky," he said grimly. "If she'd finished the whole cup." Poirot looked at the cup again, then at the untouched saucer beside it. A second cup had been prepared but not delivered. Back in the drawing room, Poirot summoned Miss Quayle. She entered nervously, pale and fidgeting with her sleeves. "I brought the tea," she admitted. "She said she was feeling unwell last night, so I thought, did you drink any of it yourself?" Miss Quayle hesitated. "No, I made 2 cups, one for her, one for myself, but I was called away before I could return for mine." Poirot narrowed his gaze. "Did you leave the tray unattended?" "Only for a moment. In the kitchen." "I didn't think," Poirot interrupted gently. "Did anyone else enter the kitchen while you were gone?" She shook her head. "Not that I saw." He thanked her and dismissed her with care. Once she was gone, he turned to Wilkes. "We have an attempted poisoning, and we must assume it is related to the murder. You think someone tried to silence Lady Portia?" Poirot considered. "Perhaps." Poirot examined the cup. A faint, acrid scent lingered. "Not strong but unmistakable. Call the doctor," he told Wilkes. Immediately, turning back to Portia, he asked, "Who brought you the tea?" Her breath came in shallow bursts. "Miss Quayle. She said I looked tired and offered it to me. I didn't think why would she?" Poirot raised a hand. "You must rest, madam. Say no more for now." The doctor arrived within minutes. A weary man named Dr. Isherwood. He conducted a brief examination and announced that while Lady Portia had not ingested a lethal dose, there were clear signs of mild poisoning enough to cause disorientation and stomach distress. "She's lucky," he said grimly. "If she'd finished the whole cup." Poirot looked at the cup again, then at the untouched saucer beside it. A second cup had been prepared but not delivered. Back in the drawing room, Poirot summoned Miss Quayle. She entered nervously, pale and fidgeting with her sleeves. "I brought the tea," she admitted. "She said she was feeling unwell last night, so I thought, did you drink any of it yourself?" Miss Quayle hesitated. "No, I made 2 cups, one for her, one for myself, but I was called away before I could return for mine." Poirot narrowed his gaze. "Did you leave the tray unattended?" "Only for a moment. In the kitchen." "I didn't think," Poirot interrupted gently. "Did anyone else enter the kitchen while you were gone?" She shook her head. "Not that I saw." He thanked her and dismissed her with care. Once she was gone, he turned to Wilkes. "We have an attempted poisoning, and we must assume it is related to the murder. You think someone tried to silence Lady Portia?" Poirot considered. "Perhaps, or perhaps they meant to send a message. But the method subtle, almost untraceable. It speaks of calculation, of desperation." Poirot walked to the fireplace and stared into the cold ashes. "There's something missing from this puzzle, mon ami," he said. "Someone is hiding not just what they did but what they saw. And now they are afraid." Wilkes frowned. "Of being exposed?" "No," Poirot replied softly. "Of what might be discovered next." He turned toward the tall window, where the mist still hung like a curtain over the estate grounds. The damp air, shrouding everything in mystery, only deepened the atmosphere of tension within the walls. Poirot's sharp eyes seemed to penetrate the gloom outside, seeing through the fog to the truth that lay hidden within the mansion, to crimes, to secrets. "But only one truth," Poirot murmured, "and it is close now, very close." His mind worked through the labyrinth of possibilities, each thread of the investigation interwoven with the others. Lady Portia had been the intended victim of the poisoning, yet why had she been spared? And who had orchestrated this near miss? Miss Quayle had admitted to making the tea, but something about her story didn't sit well with Poirot. The timing was too convenient. The second cup left untouched was also a curious detail. Had someone meant for Lady Portia to drink both cups, or was this another deliberate move in a calculated plan? Poirot's instinct told him that this wasn't just a random act of malice. It had been planned. The target had been Portia, but the methods hinted at a deeper strategy, a play that involved far more than the poisoning of a single person. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted when Wilkes spoke again, his tone more concerned now. "Sir Poirot, we've found something else. A letter hidden in the conservatory, near where Lady Portia fell. It's addressed to her." Poirot's interest was piqued. "Bring it to me." Wilkes handed him a small, folded piece of parchment. The paper was delicate, the ink faded, and the handwriting hurried, almost desperate. Poirot's eyes scanned the message quickly. "Portia, the game is no longer in our hands. The professor was right, he saw something. We cannot allow it to be exposed. You know what must be done." Poirot's brow furrowed as he read the note again. The professor was right. He saw something. Fisk had been getting too close to uncovering something monumental, something that could shatter the carefully constructed world of those who had hidden it away for so long. This letter, hidden in the conservatory, was more than just a clue. It was a signal, a call to action, perhaps, one that had triggered the events leading to Fisk's death. The letter's cryptic ending stood out. Who was this person? Was it an accomplice or someone with greater knowledge of the conspiracy? This was the piece Poirot had been waiting for. He had suspected as much the shadowy presence of an orchestrator, someone manipulating events from the background. But now, the letter pointed him toward a new suspect. Poirot turned to Wilkes. "Have you seen anyone else moving about in the conservatory?" "Only Lady Portia and Miss Quayle, sir," Wilkes replied. "But this letter it suggests more than just the two of them." Poirot's mind churned with new possibilities. He had thought the case closed with the confession of Lady Portia Vale and Linwood. But now the pieces were falling into place in a different way. This wasn't simply about murder, it was about a larger, more dangerous conspiracy. The Orpheus Project, Fisk's discovery. And now this mysterious letter, it all pointed to someone far more powerful than anyone had suspected. Poirot's gaze sharpened. There's someone else in this story, someone we have not yet considered. Wilkes looked at him, waiting for the detective to elaborate, but Poirot remained silent, his mind working faster than his words could follow. He turned once more to the window, watching the mist settle over the grounds, feeling as if it were closing in around him. The answer's just beyond reach. The truth is out there, Wilkes, Poirot said softly, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. And we are closer than ever to discovering it. The game was far from over. Chapter 9. Hidden connections. The attempted poisoning had unsettled more than just Lady Portia. By late afternoon, the air in Blackwood estate had grown taut with suspicion. Guests now spoke in whispers, doors were closed more frequently, and every clink of a teacup echoed louder than it should. Poirot walked the halls like a watchmaker listening for a misaligned gear. He began his next round of interviews with Thomas Linwood once more, this time catching him in the small study off the east wing. Linwood looked cornered, his shirt collar slightly wilted, a bead of sweat trickling just beneath his ear. "Monsieur Linwood," Poirot said without ceremony, "you claimed last night you had no knowledge of the missing lens case. But I have learned otherwise." Linwood looked up sharply. "I told you." Poirot raised a finger. "None. You told me you didn't know what I was talking about, which is not quite the same as denial." He pulled from his pocket a photograph one found by Wilkes in the servants' quarters showing Professor Fisk with a slim metal case in his hands, distinctly marked with an engraving of concentric rings. This, Poirot said, was not merely a lens case. It was the housing for a specially ground filter Fisk had commissioned in secrecy, a prototype designed to reflect light at a particular frequency, I suspect, which revealed something the professor was not meant to see. Linwood's face was a study in collapse. He sagged against the edge of the desk, his fingers trembling slightly. "I didn't take it to hurt him," he muttered. "He left it behind in the drawing room. He was careless sometimes, especially when excited. I meant to return it. But then..." Poirot's voice was quiet. "But then he died." Linwood nodded slowly. "And I panicked. I didn't want anyone thinking I had stolen it. Especially with that," he gestured vaguely toward the telescope room, "happening." Poirot regarded him for a long moment, then said, "I believe you did not kill Professor Fisk, but you are keeping other truths." Linwood hesitated. "There is one thing. He had asked me to transcribe part of his journal the day before the accident. I still have the draft in my drawer." He handed Poirot a folded page. The ink was fresh, the handwriting neat in Linwood's hand. At the bottom, a notation in the professor's own writing read, "Mirror anomaly now shows consistent doubling. Object in..." She looked down. "I confronted him about it once. He said they were inspired. I didn't believe him." Poirot rose, walking to the window. "So many secrets," he murmured. "And still we are circling the truth." Poirot requested one final visitor before dinner. Oliver Dean. Dean entered hesitantly, his usual jittery energy now subdued. Poirot wasted no time. "I've spoken with Ivy Blackwood. She claims your diagrams mirror Professor Fisk's precisely. That you copied them." Dean's jaw tightened. "They're mine. I mean, I drew them myself. But yes, they were based on Fisk's. You were assisting him. I admired him. I tried to contribute. But he never really saw me as an equal. Always a student, never a partner. Poirot nodded. And what did you see through the telescope? Dean looked startled. Poirot's voice grew softer. I believe you looked. After he was gone. You couldn't resist. Dean hesitated, then whispered. There was something. A flicker. A dark shape that didn't move like a planet or satellite. Just hung there, like it was watching back. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And what did you do with that knowledge? Dean looked away. Nothing. I swear. Poirot let the silence linger, then finally said, You may go, ***, left alone. Poirot paced slowly. The threads were aligning. A concealed relationship. A stolen filter. A figure in the sky no one could explain. And now an attempted poisoning. Someone was frightened not only of the crime being uncovered, but of the knowledge itself. Professor Fisk had seen something, but more importantly, someone else had seen him see it. And in that fear, a motive had been born. Not of greed, not of rivalry, but of terror. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue at night. Long after the last candle had been extinguished and the halls of Blackwood Estate fell into an easy silence, Poirot returned alone to the observatory. He climbed the spiral stair with slow, deliberate steps, each footfall echoing against the iron frame like a metronome for his thoughts. The telescope's broken remains had been removed, the room left stark and skeletal, and yet the scent of brass and oil lingered faintly, like the ghost of a conversation left unfinished. Poirot moved to the railing, gazing out across the moor. Mist rolled thick over the hedgerows, and the stars normally brilliant in this part of Devonshire were hidden behind a gauze of low clouds. He did not need the stars now. He needed clarity. He turned to the small wall cabinet where Fisk had stored his diagrams. The lock had been snapped open during the initial investigation, but Poirot had requested no one disturb its contents. Now, under dim lantern light, he examined its interior once more. A row of journals sat neatly stacked, each labeled by date. But at the very back, behind a loose panel, Poirot found what he had quietly suspected, a slip of paper, concealed between the wood and the wall, folded twice, thin as a breath. Carefully, he opened it to see what cannot be seen. The mirror must be flawed. To trap it, the eye must lie. Someone has already looked, and it knows. There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakably Professor Fisk's, tight, spidery, urgent. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He took the note and compared it to one of the diagrams in the cabinet. A hand-drawn arc showing Saturn's rings, annotated with degrees and measurements. Beside the ring was a tiny mark almost like a blemish circled twice and labeled. Repeats position 6 degrees. Not planetary. The alignment struck Poirot. If the anomaly was observed at precisely the same angle over multiple nights, and from a rotating Earth, it suggested it wasn't a celestial object at all. It was fixed, terrestrial, possibly artificial. That changed everything. As he lowered the paper, his gaze fell upon a cracked tile near the telescope mount. It had gone unnoticed amid the wreckage. Something had pressed into it deliberately or by accident, leaving a faint but clear indentation. Poirot crouched and ran a gloved finger over it. The shape was familiar. Not a boot, not a heel, a cane. A circular, flattened mark with the distinct rivulet from a rubber stopper. But not Dr. Whitby's cane. His was iron-tipped and narrower. Poirot's mind turned swiftly. Only one other person had moved quietly through the observatory with a similar instrument. A walking stick, not medical, but ornamental, and used, notably, by Oliver Dean during evening strolls. But why conceal that? He stood, tucking the folded note into his breast pocket. The cane mark, subtle though it was, had not been caused in haste. It was from someone who had stood still for some time, observing or adjusting. Someone who had lingered perhaps the night before the telescope's collapse. And then Poirot remembered Dean's earlier words, I drew them myself. But yes, they were based on Fisk's. It was the phrasing. Not copied, not stolen, but based on a carefully selected ambiguity. Poirot had seen such linguistic sleights used in courtrooms and confessionals. Truth veiled in careful phrasing. But there had been no legal strategy, only fear. Poirot stepped to the corner of the room where the spare alignment tools were stored. He opened the drawer. A metal wrench, a cleaning cloth, and he inhaled sharply one of the smaller lens frames, visibly scorched at its inner edge. He held it up to the lantern. A faint, blackened smudge ran along the rim, a sign of intense light exposure, possibly heat. It had cracked slightly along its curvature dot and etched inside the housing, almost imperceptible. Was a word, Orpheus? Poirot stood frozen for a moment. Orpheus. The name of Fisk's secret project, one he had only ever hinted at in letters to a colleague. Recently deceased. Poirot had read them, posthumously released, a few months prior. He had assumed Orpheus was a code for some complex observation system. But what if it was not a project, but a warning? He exited the observatory in silence and returned to his room without a word. Only when the door was shut did he allow himself to pace. Someone in this house had read those diagrams, had seen the mark in the sky, the eye that reflected too perfectly, and someone had recognized what Fisk's lens revealed. It had terrified them. Poirot now possessed everything he needed, not the confession, not yet, but the contradiction, the details that could not be explained away. He removed the scorched lens and held it between thumb and forefinger, letting the lantern light pass through, a flawed mirror. Fisk had called it dot to reveal what the perfect lens could not. Poirot smiled grimly. Tomorrow. He will press on dot tomorrow. The mirror will crack again. But this time, not in the sky, this time, in someone's soul. Chapter 11. Tensions riseth morning after Poirot's discovery in the observatory. A tense stillness hung over Blackwood Estate. The lingering unease from the previous night's attempted poisoning had not dissipated, and now the air seemed to grow heavier with every hour. The guests shuffled through the house, avoiding one another's gaze, as though unsure who among them would be next to unravel beneath Poirot's scrutiny. The detective had not yet made his move. Instead, he observed. His mind, ever sharp, was busy assembling the pieces, seeing through the cracks and lies, waiting for the right moment to tighten the net. It was that moment which arrived unexpectedly when Ivy Blackwood appeared at Poirot's door that morning. She was composed as always, but the underlying tension in her movements gave away her intent long before she spoke. "Monsieur." "Poirot," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "I think it's time we spoke more directly." Poirot motioned for her to sit, his demeanor as calm as ever. "Madam, you are always welcome to speak your mind." She glanced around, as though ensuring they were alone, before lowering her voice. "You know I have no love for my husband's eccentricities, or his guests, but I don't want to see anyone suffer for something they didn't do." Poirot nodded. "Then perhaps you should begin by telling me what you know." She hesitated before speaking, her eyes flickering with a mix of reluctance and fear. "I saw something last night, just before the telescope collapsed. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't know if it was my place." Poirot's interest piqued, and he leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, madam." I saw Oliver Dean near the observatory. He was standing in the shadows, watching the telescope," Ivy said. "He looked agitated, but when he saw me, he quickly turned and walked away. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but when I found out about the professor's death, I wondered." Poirot absorbed the information in silence, considering the possible implications. Ivy's revelation was not inconsequential, but it didn't change the course of his thoughts. The pieces of the puzzle were not yet aligned. "Why didn't you speak of this earlier?" Poirot asked gently. "I didn't want to accuse anyone without cause," she said, her voice tight. "But now I see how things are stacking up. I've heard rumors about Dean's work with Fisk. They were close. Too close. And I can't help but think there was more to their relationship than either of them admitted. Poirot studied her intently. You are suggesting, madam, that Mr. Dean and Professor Fisk were involved in something more clandestine? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I don't know for sure, but Fisk was always looking for something outside of conventional astronomy, perhaps even something dangerous. He had theories that went beyond what the scientific community accepted. Poirot's mind raced. Dangerous, you say? What did he believe he was uncovering? I'm not entirely sure, Ivy replied, her voice softening. But there were hints in the conversations he had with Dean. He spoke of an object in the sky, something not naturally occurring, and he seemed convinced that it was not just a celestial body, but something that had been placed there. Poirot paused, considering the full weight of her words. Placed there? You mean artificial? Yes, Ivy replied. He didn't say much about it directly, but I overheard him a few times. Something about a signal or a pattern he couldn't explain. He called it Orpheus. I don't know why he never told me what it meant. Poirot's eyes flickered to the door, his thoughts racing. And what did Dean think of all this? I don't know what Dean believed, but I do know he was obsessed with Fisk's findings. He followed him everywhere. He wanted to know everything. It wasn't healthy. It was as if he couldn't stop chasing after some truth he thought was out of reach. Poirot stood up and paced slowly, his mind working through the implications. And yet, after all this, Dean acted with a mask of innocence. He claimed to be a simple admirer of Fisk's work. But you, madam, you saw the truth. I saw fear, she replied softly. Fear in his eyes. Fear of being exposed. I believe he knew exactly what Fisk had found, and I believe he was afraid of what would happen if the world learned it. Poirot turned back to face her, his gaze sharp. And you, what do you fear, madam? Ivy's eyes flickered with something unreadable. I fear the truth, and I fear what Dean might do to keep it hidden. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I have a feeling it's going to be far worse than anyone expects. Poirot studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. I believe you have spoken truthfully, madam, and your fear is shared by others. But the truth, as always, is more intricate than any one person's fear. He motioned for her to leave. Thank you for your honesty. It will not go unnoticed. She stood, hesitated, then nodded. I just want it to end. I want peace. As Ivy left, Poirot sat back down, his mind churning with the new information. Ivy's words had added a new layer of complexity to the case. Dean had known far more than he had let on. And now, with Fisk's work tied to something far darker than mere astronomy, the stakes were higher than ever. Poirot was no longer just solving a murder. He was uncovering a conspiracy, one that had been hidden in plain sight. And soon, it would reveal itself, whether the world was ready or not. The tension in the estate continued to build throughout the day. Poirot knew the time had come to make his final move. The pieces were set. Now it was only a matter of drawing them together, piece by piece, until the truth became undeniable. The game was nearing its end, and Poirot was prepared to expose the real killer, not just the murderer of Professor Fisk, but the one who had been manipulating the entire situation from the shadows. Chapter 12. The confrontation. Evening was drawing to a close, and a subdued sense of anticipation had settled over Blackwood Estate. Poirot could feel it in the air, the subtle shift in behavior, the way the guests, though still present, kept their distance. Each one seemed to carry their own burden of guilt, however small. The weight of suspicion pressed down upon them all. Poirot had allowed the mystery to fester, allowing tension to build naturally. Each suspect had contributed their fragment of the truth, and now they were woven together into a web too intricate for anyone to escape from unscathed. Yet he could not deny that one final piece was needed. The final confrontation had to come. The truth had to be unmasked. And it will be tonight. In the parlor, Poirot arranged the guests. His expression was calm, but his mind was alert. He had called them all together, without explanation. Sir Reginald stood near the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back, looking every bit the nobleman he had once been. Lady Portia sat stiffly, her posture regal, though there was a thin sheen of sweat on her brow. Linwood lingered by the doorway, his nervous energy palpable, and Ivy Blackwood, who had been somewhat more open with her suspicions earlier, now seemed colder, more distant. Poirot allowed them to settle before speaking. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice low but commanding. "We are all here not for mere discussion, but for resolution. I have listened to your stories, observed your movements, and most importantly, noted your silences. For silence, it is often the loudest confession. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. I now know the truth of what happened to Professor Fisk." Poirot continued, his eyes scanning each face in turn. "I know who among you had the means, the opportunity, and most crucially the motive to commit murder." There was a ripple of unease, but no one spoke. "I have heard your lies, your omissions, your half-truths," Poirot said, his tone sharpening. "But I have also seen the cracks in your facades. I have listened to the inconsistencies, and it is those inconsistencies that I will now expose." He turned to Lady Portia Vale first. "Madam, you claim to have no personal stake in the professor's work, and yet you were one of the last to see him alive. You told me that your conversation with him was one of simple disagreement, but you omitted the true nature of that disagreement. You feared what he had discovered, did you not? His obsession with the mirror anomaly threatened to expose something far more personal to you than you were willing to admit." Lady Portia's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Her eyes flickered toward the others in the room, and for a moment, Poirot could almost see the strategy playing out in her mind. Would she speak? Would she deflect? Poirot wasn't finished. "And you, Monsieur Linwood," Poirot continued, turning toward the secretary. "You, who were so eager to deny your knowledge of the Lens case. You who insisted on your innocence. But I see through your fawade. You were not just a passive observer to Fisk's research. You were deeply involved. You feared what Fisk was on the verge of revealing, and you were not the only one. You understood the importance of the Orpheus Project, didn't you?" Linwood's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His hands clenched at his sides. "You were too afraid of Fisk's discoveries, what he had seen, and, more importantly, what he had written about in his journals. That's why you stole his Lens case. You wanted to control what information was shared, to ensure no one else could make the connections Fisk had already made." Ivy Blackwood shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes narrowing. "And you, Poirot, believe you have it all figured out?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you know everything, but you've missed one thing crucial to understanding why Fisk died." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, madam, you wish to speak. Very well, tell me, then. What have I missed?" Ivy's lips curled into a slight, tight smile. "You've failed to see that Fisk was not the only one in danger. He was being watched by forces far beyond anyone here. He wasn't just afraid of his colleagues. He was afraid of what he had discovered about the world beyond. He wasn't just revealing the secrets of the universe. He was revealing a truth that could destroy everything we know." Poirot stepped closer to her. "You speak of fear again, madam. But of what? What is the truth? And why should Fisk die to keep it hidden?" Ivy met his gaze squarely. "Because Fisk wasn't just studying stars. He was studying something that had been buried long ago. Something that wasn't meant to be found. And the moment he got too close to uncovering it, there were those who would stop at nothing to make sure he never spoke of it again." Poirot's eyes flickered. "Go on. The Orpheus Project wasn't just about stargazing," Ivy continued. It was about the reality of something far more dangerous. Fisk believed there was an ancient force operating behind the scenes, guiding humanity. It wasn't just a theory. He had proof. There was a collective breath drawn in the room. And you, Ivy continued, her voice now colder, you all thought you could just use him, hide him, shut him up. But Fisk wasn't that easy to control. And in the end, someone had to silence him. For good. Poirot stepped back, allowing the weight of her words to hang in the air. You see, madam, Poirot said softly, it is not just the murder I am solving. It is the why behind it. And now, I understand. He turned slowly toward Oliver Dean, whose eyes were wide, his body stiff with fear. You, monsieur, were the final piece. You knew of Fisk's obsession, didn't you? You knew what he was getting close to discovering. And when he finally started to connect the dots, when he figured out that the patterns were not just celestial, but something else entirely, you knew you had to stop him. Dean's voice cracked as he spoke, barely above a whisper. I never meant for him to die. I only wanted him to stop. I never thought it would go this far. Poirot's eyes softened slightly. But it did, monsieur. And in the end, you, like the others, wanted to protect what you knew could be the most dangerous truth of all. Dean's head dropped, his shoulders sagging in defeat. The game had been played out in full. And now, the truth was undeniable. Poirot looked around at the group one last time. There's only one thing left for me to do now. He turned to Sir Reginald, who had been standing silently by the fireplace, watching the exchange unfold. Sir Reginald, Poirot said, his voice carrying a finality. It is time to reveal the full truth, and I have no doubt that you, like everyone else in this room, will be surprised by what is to come. The silence that followed was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a revelation that changes everything. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. Heath revelation hung heavy in the air, like the oppressive fog that had settled over the estate. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick with the weight of the truth, and the atmosphere felt charged, as though the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Poirot stood still, watching the reactions of those gathered before him. Lady Portia Vale's lips were pressed into a thin line, and her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Linwood, still standing by the doorway, seemed to be fighting an internal battle, his face pale but resolute, his eyes darting about as though seeking a way out. Ivy Blackwood remained seated, her face a mask of quiet calculation, though her earlier bravado had faltered. And then there was Oliver Dean, his body rigid, his eyes wide with fear, as though he had just realized the full extent of the trap he had unwittingly walked into. You are all hiding something, Poirot continued, his voice steady but firm. But none of you will walk away from this unscathed. The truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply you bury it. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Then, with a sudden, almost imperceptible movement, he glanced toward the door, where a shadow had appeared at the threshold. Before anyone could react, a figure darted into the room. It was Thomas Linwood, but he was not the composed, nervous secretary who had sat before Poirot earlier. No, this was a man in panic, his face twisted in terror, his eyes wide and unfocused. Stop him, Ivy Blackwood shouted, rising from her seat in alarm. But it was too late. Linwood bolted for the door, his hands outstretched as though he could somehow break free from the invisible chains that bound him to this moment. His breath came in sharp gasps, and his footsteps echoed like the frantic pounding of his heart. Poirot reacted swiftly, his instincts honed over years of solving the most intricate of puzzles. With a calmness that betrayed no hint of urgency, he stepped forward, blocking Linwood's path. Monsieur Linwood, Poirot said, his voice low but commanding. Where do you think you are going? Linwood's eyes flickered with panic. his fingers twitching at his sides as though he were looking for something to hold on to, something to steady himself. I can't stay here. It's too much. I can't let you expose me. I'll go mad. Go mad? Poirot asked, his tone almost pitiful. And yet, monsieur, you were already living a lie. The truth is what has driven you to this moment. Linwood faltered, his gaze dropping to the floor, and for a brief moment, Poirot saw him as the terrified man he truly was, trapped by his own choices, afraid of what the world would think if the truth were to come out. I didn't mean to kill him, Linwood whispered hoarsely. I didn't mean to. It was supposed to be a warning. Just a warning. A warning? Poirot repeated. A warning for whom, monsieur? Linwood's hands clenched into fists, and for the briefest moment, it seemed as though he might break down entirely. But then, with a sudden burst of energy, he lunged toward the nearby window, his hands pulling at the heavy drapery as though he intended to flee through it. Stop! Ivy Blackwood shouted, rushing forward. Poirot moved with precision. With a quick, calculated step, he blocked Linwood's path once again, this time positioning himself directly in front of the window. Linwood froze, his breathing ragged. Monsieur Linwood, Poirot said, his voice quiet but firm. You cannot escape this. The more you run, the tighter the noose grows. Linwood's eyes darted from Poirot to Ivy, his face flushed with humiliation. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I never wanted this to happen. I just wanted to protect what I discovered. I thought Fisk was dangerous. He was obsessed. Obsessed with what? Poirot asked, his curiosity piqued. Linwood glanced up at him, a brief flicker of comprehension in his eyes, but his next words came out in a rush, almost as though he were confessing to a long-buried sin. Fisk was close to discovering something not meant to be found. He believed there was a pattern in the stars, something not natural, not human. I thought, he broke off, as though unable to speak further, his voice trembling. I thought if I could stop him, I could protect everyone. I thought it would be safer to bury it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Buried it. What did he discover, monsieur? Linwood's body slumped, his shoulders sagging, as though the weight of the confession was finally breaking through. It wasn't just a theory, you see. It was real. Orpheus. Fisk wasn't just observing stars. He believed someone had placed them there deliberately. There was a hidden signal in the pattern of the cosmos. Something artificial. Something that could change everything. Poirot stepped back, his mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The Orpheus Project, Fisk's obsessive studies, and now this a terrifying, almost otherworldly revelation that had set the entire tragedy in motion. And so, Poirot murmured, you killed Fisk to stop him from revealing this truth. Linwood's face twisted with a mixture of guilt and despair. I never meant for him to die. But when I saw how far he'd gone, how close he was to uncovering everything, I thought I could just make him stop. I thought if I sabotaged the telescope, threatened him, he would back off. But I didn't know he would be so determined. And then everything spiraled out of control. The room was silent for a long moment, and Poirot let the weight of Linwood's confession settle over the group. He could see now how fear, obsession, and guilt had driven Linwood to this point. His desire to protect what he believed was dangerous, something greater than Fisk's research, had ultimately destroyed the professor and nearly brought ruin to them all. As Poirot took a slow, deliberate step toward Linwood, he said, it is often the case that we think we are saving others from the truth, but in reality, it is we who need saving. Linwood sank to his knees, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. Tears welled in his eyes, but there was no comfort to be had. The truth had been revealed, and now there was no turning back. Ivy Blackwood stepped forward, her face devoid of emotion. She regarded Linwood for a long moment, her gaze cold and unfeeling. Did you ever think about the consequences, monsieur? She asked quietly. Or did you think you could stop the world from turning? Linwood could not answer. His head hung low, his hands shaking. The lies, the half-truths, the desperate acts of self-preservation, everything had led to this inevitable moment. Poirot turned to the others, his voice calm but resolute. The game is over, mesdames et messieurs. The truth has been exposed. Now we must deal with the consequences. As the sound of approaching constables filled the hallway, Poirot felt the weight of the case lift from his shoulders, but the burden of what had been uncovered lingered. Some truths, once seen, could never be unseen, and some mysteries, once solved, left scars that would never fade. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. Evening had fallen completely. By the time Poirot gathered everyone once more, the tension in the room was thick, palpable, and no one spoke. Ivy Blackwood stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed, her face as unreadable as ever. Linwood had been taken away by the constables, and now the remaining guests were left to grapple with the consequences of the truth that had been exposed. Poirot had told Sir Reginald that the case was not yet closed, and he was correct. There was one final piece, one last step to the puzzle, and it required him to confront a lingering mystery that still clung to the edges of the investigation. The room was silent, and Poirot knew that this moment, the final moment of revelation, had arrived. "Madam," Poirot began, turning his gaze to Lady Portia Vale, who had yet to speak. She had been calm, collected, and poised in the face of the storm, but now there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a faint trace of fear. "Perhaps you knew more than you let on," Poirot said, his voice steady, but with an edge. "You knew of Fisk's obsession with the stars. You knew that the Orpheus Project was more than just research, it was something deeper. And you feared it." Lady Portia did not flinch, but her lips trembled ever so slightly. "I feared nothing," she replied coldly, though the unease in her voice was unmistakable. Poirot stepped closer, his expression unwavering. "You did, madam. You feared Fisk's discovery. You feared it because it had implications far beyond his research. Fisk had uncovered something so dangerous that it threatened not just your life, but the lives of those who had long been in control of this world." Lady Portia's expression hardened, her shoulders straightening as she squared herself against Poirot's accusations. "You're mistaken. Fisk was simply a man lost in his own delusions. He had no real discoveries, only fantasies." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Fantasies, you say? And yet you were the one who pushed him so hard. You were the one who wanted him to reveal everything. You were the one who knew that if Fisk ever connected the dots, the world would be changed." She did not respond immediately. Instead, her gaze flickered briefly to the others in the room, to Sir Reginald, who stood at the window, his expression unreadable. It was a brief moment of weakness, but Poirot noticed it. He could see the crack in her resolve. "Do you not understand, Monsieur Poirot?" Lady Portia's voice was quieter now, tinged with a hint of resignation. "Fisk was a danger to everyone, to all of us. He was dangerous because he had seen the truth, but he didn't understand it. The truth was not meant to be found. Not yet." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The truth of the Orpheus Project." She nodded slowly, her gaze meeting Poirot's. "Yes, the project was never about astronomy or the stars. It was about something much older, something that had been hidden for centuries." A murmur ran through the room, and Poirot could see the others stiffen, as though realizing they were standing on the edge of something far greater than the murder they had been discussing. "I don't follow," Poirot said, his voice steady. Lady Portia took a deep breath, as if preparing to explain something that had long been buried within her. "Fisk wasn't just studying the stars, Poirot. He was studying something beyond the stars. There are forces at play in this world that most people never see. Powers older than time itself. Orpheus was never a project about the cosmos, it was a project about an ancient, hidden order, a secret group that has been guiding humanity's development for centuries. Poirot's mind raced. He could see the pieces falling into place, but he needed more. "And you, madam, what role do you play in this order?" Lady Portia did not flinch. "I am not a part of it, Poirot, but I know of it. I have known for many years. And so did Fisk. He was getting too close. And when I realized that, I did what I had to do." "You killed him?" Poirot asked softly, the words hanging in the air between them. Lady Portia's lips trembled for a brief moment, and then she nodded. "Yes, I killed him. Not directly, but I made sure that he would never reveal the truth. I convinced Linwood to help me. He was scared, but I promised him that no one would get hurt." Poirot absorbed her confession with a quiet nod. "And the telescope?" he asked. "You destroyed it?" "I didn't destroy it," she replied. "I simply set it in motion. I knew that once the telescope was tampered with, Fisk would believe it was a failure. He would give up on it. He was too stubborn, too obsessed with the idea of finding something beyond what was already known. But he didn't realize that some truths are better left hidden." Poirot stood still for a long moment, considering her words. "But why involve Dean?" he asked finally. "Why use him as a pawn in this scheme?" "Dean was just the tool," Lady Portia said. "He was an admirer too naive to understand what was really at stake. He was easily manipulated. I convinced him that if Fisk wasn't stopped, everything would be lost." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And Linwood? How did he get involved?" "He was the one who was most vulnerable," Lady Portia said. "I knew he would do anything to protect his secrets, and once I had him in my grip, he was easy to manipulate." The room fell silent, the weight of Lady Portia's confession settling over everyone. For a long moment, no one spoke. Sir Reginald remained at the window, his back to them, as though he could not bear to witness the unraveling of everything he had once held dear. Poirot turned toward him. "And you, monsieur?" he asked softly. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Sir Reginald did not turn around. "I knew," he said quietly, his voice tinged with regret. "I knew what was at stake, and I chose to protect my own legacy. I was wrong." Poirot's gaze softened. "Yes, monsieur, you were." Lady Portia's confession had been the final piece. Now the truth was laid bare. But with the truth came the realization that they were all complicit in something far darker than mere murder. They had all been pawns in a game that spanned centuries. Poirot turned to the group, his face unreadable. "Now that the truth has been revealed, it is time to face the consequences." There was no turning back now. The web had been unraveled, and the truth, however dangerous, had come to light. The only question that remained was how each of them would now face the darkness they had uncovered. Chapter 15. The final gathering. Fire crackled in the hearth, casting a flickering glow across the room. Outside, the fog still clung to the estate like a blanket, the moonlight weak and diffused. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the remnants of unspoken guilt and the echoes of confessions. The air, once heavy with suspicion, now simmered with the tension of knowing too much, of truths that could not be undone. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his hands folded behind his back, his eyes scanning the group before him. He had assembled them here, in this dimly lit parlor, for one last reckoning. They were all in the same place now, suspects, accomplices, and bystanders alike. All of them had played a part in the tragedy that had unfolded at Blackwood Estate, and it was time for the final pieces to fall into place. Lady Portia Vale was seated closest to the fire, her posture stiff and her eyes cast downward. Despite her earlier confession, there was still a sense of defiance in her, the quiet arrogance of someone who had long believed herself above reproach. Linwood, standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably. His earlier fear had not subsided. but now it was tempered with the quiet resignation of someone who knew he could not escape. What was coming? Ivy Blackwood remained silent as ever, her arms crossed, her gaze distant. Sir Reginald stood by the window, his face shadowed, his mind seemingly far away. It was clear that the weight of the past had broken something inside him, something that had been carefully constructed over a lifetime of privilege. Poirot looked at each of them in turn, his mind racing with the complexities of the case. There was a finality to the way the truth had been revealed, but also an unsettling sense of incompleteness. Yes, the killer had been exposed, but the motives behind the crime, those were still tangled in the web of secrecy, fear, and ambition that had stretched across the estate. The deeper questions remained unanswered, and it was those questions that Poirot had to address now. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice calm but firm. We have come to the end of this journey. You have all played your parts in this tragic tale, and it is time to understand why. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Poirot allowed the gravity of his words to settle over them. You, Madam, Poirot said, turning to Lady Portia, you feared what Fisk had uncovered. You knew that his discovery would change everything, would expose a truth so dangerous that it could not be allowed to see the light of day. Lady Portia stiffened, but she did not interrupt. She knew he was right. She had always known. You were not the only one to fear Fisk's findings, Poirot continued, his gaze shifting to Linwood. Monsieur Linwood, you were driven by the same fear, but your fear was not of the professor's discovery alone. It was of what that discovery would mean for your own position, for your future. You thought that if Fisk were silenced, the world would continue as it always had. Linwood's eyes flickered with guilt, but he remained silent. There was nothing left to say. Poirot's eyes then moved to Ivy Blackwood. Madam, you were the most conflicted of all. You knew the truth about Fisk's work, but you also knew the danger it posed. You feared what it would mean for your family, for your reputation, for everything you had worked for. You chose to protect those things, even if it meant playing your part in the professor's death. Ivy's lips tightened, but she did not protest. She knew Poirot was right. She had tried to distance herself from the truth, but it had always been there, hovering at the edges of her conscience. Poirot took a deep breath before turning to Sir Reginald, who had been silent throughout the exchange. And you, monsieur, Poirot said, his voice softer now, you were the one who knew most of all. You were the one who understood what Fisk had discovered, and you were the one who allowed it to happen. You were the one who enabled the lies, who covered up the truth. Sir Reginald did not look at Poirot. He stood by the window, his hands clenched at his sides. The guilt, the weight of his actions, was too much for him to bear. You knew, monsieur, Poirot said again, his voice growing softer still. You knew what Fisk had uncovered. You knew that the professor's discovery would expose a world of secrets, of power, of ancient forces that had been hidden for centuries. But instead of confronting it, you chose to protect your legacy. You chose to protect yourself. Sir Reginald's voice cracked as he finally spoke. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let him expose it. It would have ruined everything I had built. Poirot nodded. Yes, monsieur. That was the true tragedy. You were also consumed by fear, by the need to protect what you had, that you forgot what mattered most, the truth. There was a long pause, and then Poirot turned to face them all. The professor's death, he said quietly, was not a simple act of violence. It was not just the result of jealousy or fear. It was the culmination of years of secrecy, of lies, of choices made in the name of self-preservation. Lady Portia spoke up then, her voice trembling with a mixture of guilt and defiance. We didn't want to hurt anyone. We just wanted to protect ourselves. Fisk, he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't listen. Poirot's gaze softened. I understand, madam, but in your attempt to protect yourselves, you destroyed everything. You destroyed a man, A man who had no desire for power, no desire for fame. Fisk only wanted to understand the truth. He paused for a moment, then continued. But the truth is a dangerous thing. It threatens the very foundation of what we hold dear. It forces us to confront the things we would rather ignore. Poirot's eyes moved from one person to the next, each of them marked by their own actions, their own decisions. The murder of Professor Fisk had been a turning point, a moment when the secrets of Blackwood Estate could no longer be kept hidden. It had been a tragic mistake, but it had also been inevitable. In the end, truth always comes to light, no matter how deep you bury it. Poirot took a step back, his gaze lingering on Sir Reginald. I have solved the case, but there is no true victory here. There are no winners in this story, only those who must face the consequences of their actions. He turned to face the group, his expression somber. I will ensure that justice is served. But understand this, sometimes the truth is not enough. Sometimes it is the choices we make after we know the truth that define us. The room remained still. No one spoke. The weight of Poirot's words hung in the air, and for the first time, it seemed as though the house had fallen silent, not from fear, but from the weight of regret. Poirot turned toward the door. I have finished here, but you must all live with the consequences of what you have done. The truth, once known, cannot be erased, and so now you must decide what to do with it. With those final words, Poirot exited the room, leaving them behind, each of them left to grapple with the ruin of their own making. The case was closed, but the answers had come at a cost, and as Poirot stepped out into the cold night air, he knew that this was a truth that would haunt them all forever. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Morning that followed the final gathering at Blackwood Estate was as bleak and quiet as any Poirot had ever encountered. The sky above the house hung low, gray and unyielding, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the loss of both innocence and life. The silence within the estate was equally oppressive. The usual hum of domestic activity had died down, replaced by a subdued atmosphere where each footfall echoed too loudly, and every word seemed too heavy to speak. Poirot stood in his private study, the room now familiar to him, the scent of old books and polished wood filling the air. His fingers, which had so often traced the edges of small details and observations, rested on the back of his chair, his mind far from the case at hand. He had solved it, of course. The murderer had confessed. The lies had been uncovered, the truth laid bare. Yet something in the aftermath lingered, something unsettled, like a melody left unfinished. The pieces of the puzzle had fit together too neatly. Sir Reginald, Lady Portia, Ivy Blackwood, Linwood each had played a part in the web of deceit and fear that had led to Professor Fisk's death. Each had carried their own secret, their own personal reason for wanting to keep the truth hidden. But as Poirot had learned in his many years of solving mysteries, the most dangerous secrets were not always the ones that were hidden. They were often the ones that were only partially revealed. The clock ticked steadily, but Poirot remained motionless, lost in thought. It was at that moment that the knock on his door broke the silence. He turned to face it, recognizing the soft, deliberate rap as one that belonged to Constable Wilkes. Without speaking, Poirot gestured for him to enter. Wilkes stepped in, his expression grim. He closed the door behind him and hesitated before speaking. Poirot, there's something you should see. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Something more, monsieur? Wilkes nodded, his jaw clenched. Yes, sir. It's about the Orpheus project. Poirot's interest piqued. He gestured for Wilkes to continue, his sharp mind immediately jumping to the possibility of something he had missed. Perhaps, in all the chaos, something more had been overlooked. Sir Reginald, Wilkes continued, had been in contact with someone before the professor's death, a colleague, someone involved in the higher circles of the project. We found a set of letters he had hidden in his study. They were encrypted, Poirot's brow furrowed. Encrypted? This was something entirely new. Did Sir Reginald ever mention this to anyone? Poirot asked. No, Wilkes replied. It seems he kept it to himself, even from Lady Portia. We had a look at the letters, and it's clear they were part of something far bigger than just the professor's research. The letters discuss a final phase, and there's mention of a guardian, someone who was meant to protect the secret of the Orpheus Project. Poirot's mind began to race. A guardian? He repeated, his thoughts spinning. Tell me more. Wilkes pulled a small leather-bound book from his coat pocket. This is a transcribed letter from Sir Reginald to a man named Dr. Lambert Hayes, an academic who specialized in ancient technologies. The letter references the true nature of the professor's discovery. It mentions the Orpheus Project as something far more dangerous, something connected to an ancient order that has been hidden for centuries. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. The pieces were beginning to shift again. This was not merely a tale of murder, jealousy, and betrayal. There was something far more ancient at play, something that Fisk had been close to uncovering, and something that Sir Reginald had been trying to protect. Poirot took the book from Wilkes and opened it carefully, scanning the cryptic passages with a practiced eye. The words were written in a hurried, almost frenzied script, as if Sir Reginald had feared discovery. The references to a guardian and final phase were repeated throughout, but the true meaning was still veiled behind an enigma of ancient terminology. The deeper Poirot delved into the letters, the more certain he became that the Orpheus Project was not just a study of stars. It was connected to something much darker, something that had been concealed for generations. There is more here, Monsieur Wilkes, Poirot said quietly. Something we missed before. This is not just a matter of Fisk's work, nor of personal vendettas. This is about a secret that has been hidden for centuries. Fisk, in his pursuit of the truth, was not simply a victim of jealousy. He was a threat to something far greater. Wilkes, who had been listening intently, spoke up. So it wasn't just murder for the sake of hiding a discovery. It was something more. Poirot nodded slowly. Oui, monsieur. And now we must confront it. The question is not whether Fisk's death was justified in the eyes of those who sought to protect this secret. The question is whether this secret, once exposed, will continue to haunt those who tried to keep it buried. The words hung in the air, heavy with the realization that this case had implications that reached far beyond the estate, beyond the death of a single man. It was a matter of power, of knowledge, and of the lengths to which people would go to protect a secret that had the potential to unravel the very fabric of society. Poirot stood and turned to Wilkes. I must speak with Sir Reginald, he said, his tone resolute. There is no time to waste. We must confront him with the truth before the consequences become more dire than we could have imagined. The two of them made their way quickly through the halls of Blackwood Estate, the silence around them oppressive. As they approached Sir Reginald's study, Poirot's thoughts raced. He knew that the truth had a way of emerging, even when it seemed impossible to see. But the revelations in the letters, the encrypted messages, and the references to an ancient order, the stakes had just been raised higher than he had anticipated. Sir Reginald was seated at his desk when they entered, his face pale, his hands trembling as he sifted through papers. His demeanor had changed since the last time Poirot had seen him. The confident Fouad had cracked, revealing a man deeply shaken by the weight of his own decisions. Sir Reginald, Poirot began, his voice calm but firm. I have read your letters, and I must ask you, what is the Orpheus Project truly about? What were you trying to protect? Sir Reginald's eyes widened, and for the first time since Poirot had met him, there was no mask of composure. The fear was palpable, his entire body stiffening as if bracing for a blow. You don't understand, Sir Reginald whispered, his voice hoarse. It's not just about the stars. It's about everything. Fisk was getting to close. He was about to uncover something that shouldn't be known. Poirot stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "And what is that, monsieur?" The Orpheus Project was a method of controlling knowledge that could change everything. The order that Fisk was uncovering has been guiding humanity for centuries. It's bigger than us, bigger than the world. If Fisk had found it, if he had understood the truth, everything would have fallen apart. Poirot's expression remained neutral, but inside, his mind was racing. This was the final piece, the truth that Fisk had been so close to uncovering. An ancient order, one that had been controlling knowledge and shaping the course of history. Fisk had stumbled upon it, and in his quest to expose the truth, he had paid the ultimate price. "Why kill him, monsieur?" Poirot asked softly. "Why destroy the man who could have uncovered this truth?" Sir Reginald's face crumpled, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. Because there was no other way, no other choice. Fisk would have destroyed everything. The silence in the room grew thick, suffocating. Poirot turned to Wilkes, his voice calm but firm. "Monsieur Wilkes, take Sir Reginald into custody. He will stand trial for his role in Professor Fisk's death. But understand this: his death was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning." As Wilkes moved to arrest Sir Reginald, Poirot stood still, watching the man he had once admired crumble under the weight of his own secrets. The case was over, but the real mystery had only just begun. The truth would continue to haunt them all, long after the last confession was made. And so, the game was finally over. But for Poirot, the shadows of the Orpheus Project would linger, an unfinished puzzle that would never truly be solved. Chapter 17. Outcome. And Justice. The sun had barely risen the next morning, yet Blackwood Estate was already stirring with the heavy aftermath of the previous night's events. The estate's darkened halls seemed to reverberate with the echoes of confessions, lies, and the unraveling of long-held secrets. The windows were clouded with a faint mist, which clung to the walls like a reminder of the storm that had passed through. Now only the debris of a shattered world remained. Poirot, however, remained unshaken, as he always did after a case concluded. His eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the scene before him, the lingering tension in the air, the shifting glances of the remaining guests who had stayed on despite the revelations, the barely restrained chaos that had begun to take hold of those left behind. The constables had already escorted Sir Reginald to the local authorities. A formal charge had been filed, but as Poirot well knew, it was never just about the legal resolution. It was about understanding the mind that drove the crime, the motive that lay beneath the surface, the larger game that had been played out in the shadows of the estate. There was still one more person to confront, Lady Portia Vale. After the confrontation, she had retreated into her private quarters, visibly shaken, but maintaining the same air of defiance that Poirot had come to expect from her. However, even she could no longer hide from the truth, and Poirot knew it was time to extract the final confession. He made his way through the manor, stepping with purpose, his footsteps echoing across the cold marble floors. When he reached the door to her study, he did not hesitate to knock. After a brief moment, Lady Portia's voice came through, icy and controlled, yet tinged with a weariness that was impossible to ignore. "Enter." Poirot stepped inside. Lady Portia was seated by the window, a glass of water in her hand, her eyes staring blankly outside, as though searching for something that no longer existed. She looked up when she heard the door close. "Monsieur Poirot," she said coolly, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried in earlier exchanges. "I suppose you've come to finish this game, to call it what it is." Poirot approached the chair opposite hers and sat, his posture as composed as always. "Madam, I have no intention of prolonging the game. You have confessed to your involvement in Professor Fisk's death, but there are still pieces of this puzzle that remain. I know you are hiding something more." She met his gaze. the defensiveness in her eyes finally giving way to something else, a raw vulnerability. She sighed and placed the glass down with a slight tremor in her hand. "I thought I could control it," she said, her voice low. "I thought I could keep him from seeing the truth." But Fisk was never like the others. He was obsessed with knowledge. He didn't understand the danger of what he was uncovering. The Orpheus Project wasn't just about science or stars. It was about power. Ancient power. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Power." Lady Portia nodded, her eyes distant as she continued. "The Orpheus Project was meant to uncover something far more than stars or celestial phenomena." Fisk had started to understand that there were forces in this world, things that shaped history, without anyone knowing. The project's true goal was never to understand the stars. It was to understand what was beyond them. The people who have controlled history for centuries, they've kept this knowledge hidden for a reason. I didn't want him to expose it. To the world, to anyone. Poirot studied her carefully. "And these people, madam, who are they?" Lady Portia's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at him, and for a moment, it seemed as though she was weighing whether to speak the words that had been locked inside her for so long. Then, with a sudden and almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor, she spoke. "They're the ones who keep the world in balance," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Not just the ones in power today, but the ones who have always been there. There's a network, an ancient order that has controlled the flow of knowledge, the direction of human progress. They keep things hidden for a reason. If people knew the truth, the world would fall apart." Poirot's mind raced as he absorbed her words. An ancient order, a hidden history. This was more than he had bargained for, and yet, the pieces were beginning to fit together in a way that made sense. "And Fisk, Monsieur," Lady Portia continued, her voice now tinged with regret. "He was the one who was about to reveal it all. That's why he had to die. That's why the telescope had to be destroyed. He wasn't just looking at the stars. He was looking at something much darker, something that would have disrupted everything." Poirot sat back, absorbing the enormity of what Lady Portia was saying. He had uncovered a murder, but what he was hearing now went beyond the murder of a man. It was about the murder of truth itself, the deliberate suppression of knowledge that threatened to upend centuries of control. "You believe, madam," Poirot said slowly, "that there is a force out there that must remain hidden, a truth that must never be revealed?" Lady Portia's eyes softened, her face tired. "Yes," she whispered, "and Fisk was close to exposing it. He was too close." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And you, madam, did what you believed you had to do, to protect the world from something that could destroy it." Lady Portia closed her eyes briefly. "I thought I was saving us all," she murmured. "But now, I don't know anymore. Fisk was right. The truth is out there, and now it's too late. What's done is done." Poirot remained silent for a long moment, allowing her words to sink in. Finally, he spoke. "You have confessed, madam, and while the truth about Professor Fisk's death is now clear, there is still much that remains hidden. But I understand now why it had to happen, why all of you, each of you, believed what you did." He stood, his expression contemplative. "Justice will be served, but it will be a different kind of justice. The world may never know the full truth. Some things, perhaps, are better left buried." Lady Portia looked up at him, her eyes filled with a strange mix of relief and resignation. "You understand, Poirot," she said quietly. "I had no choice." Poirot gave a small nod. "No one ever does, madam. We always believe that we are making the right decision, even when it leads to tragedy." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his mind already moving on to the next step. Lady Portia's confession had sealed the case, but the questions she had raised about hidden powers, ancient orders, and truths that could shatter the world would stay with him long after the case was closed. As Poirot stepped into the hallway, He felt the weight of the entire investigation settle on his shoulders. The truth had been revealed, but there was more to this story than just murder. The Orpheus Project, Fisk's discoveries, and the shadowy figures that had kept the world in their grasp. These were questions that could never be fully answered, and yet, for Poirot, that was where the real mystery lay. He had solved the crime, but the larger enigma remained, and in that, Poirot found both satisfaction and unease. The truth had come to light, but some truths, once revealed, are never fully understood. Chapter 18. The closing remarked final hours of Poirot's stay at Blackwood Estate were as heavy with finality as the fog that refused to lift. The estate, once a lively place of intellectual debate and the hum of social gatherings, now stood silent, its grandeur overshadowed by the weight of the dark secrets that had been unearthed within its walls. Sir Reginald had been taken into custody. Linwood, too, had been formally arrested, his role in the murder now made plain. Ivy Blackwood, though not directly involved in the crime, had been marked by her association with those who were. Lady Portia Vale, too, had her part in the tragedy revealed. But even as the truth came to light, the world outside the estate would never know the full depth of the secrets they had hidden. Poirot, as always, remained calm and collected, his mind already moving past the immediate resolution of the case. He had solved the crime. The killer had confessed, the motives were clear, and the culprits would face justice. But there was still something gnawing at him, a deeper question, one that had lingered since the first day he had stepped into Blackwood Estate. The ancient forces mentioned by Lady Portia Vale, the hidden knowledge that Fisk had been close to uncovering, still haunted him. That evening, after the arrests had been made, Poirot stood by the grand window in his study, looking out over the mist-covered grounds. The estate was quiet now, as though it, too, had retreated into itself, burdened by the weight of its own history. The door creaked open behind him, and Poirot turned to find Sir Reginald standing there, his face drawn and weary. The once proud man, who had spent his life building a legacy, now seemed a shadow of himself. The weight of his actions had aged him in ways that no time could explain. "I'm sorry, Poirot," Sir Reginald said, his voice heavy with regret. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Poirot studied him for a moment before answering. "You made a choice, monsieur. A choice to protect something that you believed was more important than the truth. But as you've seen, the truth always comes to light in the end. It cannot be hidden forever." Sir Reginald lowered his gaze. "I was afraid, you see, afraid of what would happen if the truth was revealed. The Orpheus Project was never just about science. It was about power control over knowledge that had been hidden for centuries. Fisk had started to understand that, and when he began to uncover it, I feared for everything we had built." Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes not leaving Sir Reginald's face. "I understand, monsieur, but the price you paid for that fear, was it worth it?" The question hung in the air, and Sir Reginald's shoulders slumped as though the weight of it was too much to bear. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but now it's too late. The damage has been done. The truth is out there now, and there's nothing we can do to stop it." Poirot stepped closer to Sir Reginald, his voice soft but firm. "The truth is never easy to face, monsieur, but once it is known, there is only one thing left to do: live with it. The consequences of your actions, of all your choices, are now inescapable." Sir Reginald nodded, his face grim. "I suppose that's all any of us can do now." Poirot turned away from him, his gaze returning to the window, where the last light of the day was fading. The shadows had grown longer, and the mist outside seemed to shift with the wind, as though trying to carry away the weight of the past. "We all have our secrets, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice distant. "Some are buried so deep that they remain hidden even from ourselves. But in the end, the truth finds a way to the surface." Sir Reginald said nothing, but he did not leave. He simply stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the floor, as though trying to come to terms with the consequences of everything that had transpired. Poirot remained still for a moment longer, lost in thought. Then he turned back toward the man who had once been the steward of this estate, a man whose pride and fear had led to the death of a brilliant mind. He had solved the case, but there was more to it than that. The web of lies and secrets that had been spun around Fisk's death was tangled with threads that reached far beyond the confines of this house. Poirot could feel the weight of the mystery settling around him. There were still questions left unanswered. What had Fisk truly discovered? What was the true nature of the Orpheus project? And why had Sir Reginald and the others gone to such lengths to keep it hidden? But those were questions for another time. The case had been solved, and justice would be served. For now, that had to be enough. As Poirot prepared to leave Blackwood Estate the next morning, he was approached by Ivy Blackwood, her eyes still shadowed by the weight of the revelations that had come to light. She had remained silent through most of the proceedings, her involvement with the crime only fully understood in the aftermath. She had been complicit, but not in the murder itself. Still, her role in the conspiracy could not be ignored. "I've come to thank you, Poirot," Ivy said, her voice steady but tinged with something else, something deeper. "To solve this, for revealing the truth. But there's more to this than you know." Poirot turned to her, his gaze sharp. "More? You believe there is something still hidden?" Ivy hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I don't know if you'll ever fully understand what Fisk was trying to uncover. The Orpheus project, what he found, it's not something that can be explained easily. There are forces at work in this world that no one is ready for. The knowledge Fisk was getting close to was dangerous, not just for us, but for the entire world." Poirot studied her carefully. "You fear the truth, madam?" She nodded slowly. "I fear what will happen now that it's out in the open. People aren't ready for it, Poirot. And the truth, it's already set in motion things we can't undo." Poirot smiled faintly. "The truth is like a stone cast into water. It may cause ripples, but it cannot be taken back. It is always better to face it, however uncomfortable it may be." Ivy's eyes softened, and for the first time, Poirot saw a glimmer of something more human in her, the vulnerability of someone who had lived in the shadows of secrets too long. "I don't know if I can face it," Ivy said quietly. "But you're right. We all have to live with what we've done, what we've known." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, madam. That is the price we pay for knowledge." And with that, Poirot turned and made his way toward the door, his footsteps quiet on the marble floors. He had solved the case. He had brought the truth to light. But as he stepped out into the cold morning air, he knew that the world was not yet ready for the full consequences of what had been uncovered. The shadows that had been lurking behind Blackwood Estate would never fully fade. But for now, the case was closed, and that, for Poirot, was enough.